Hey guys, welcome to AirCheck Your Life. This is our podcast that simply asks you three questions every single time we get together. What's going right in your life? What's going okay that needs a tweak? And what's the area of your life that's making it hard for people to be around you? Or to put it another way, has something that you're getting in your own way about? Today, we're going to be welcoming in Dr. Dave as we do every single Wednesday. Hey, buddy. Um,
Hey,
and I was thinking about the air check framework and how it's going to relate to quadrant 3 today, and this idea of being right can be the thing that keeps you stuck. And I think for a lot of people, the thing they're doing wrong is their need to be right. So give me your feeling on that, and then we can kind of jump into today's content.
yeah, there's a lot to that. If I could just do a quick summary of last week, we talked about quadrant one, which was low awareness and low control, and then moving into quadrant two, where you're developing some awareness, and the awareness doesn't necessarily have a lot of control associated with it, but you're in a period of building that level of control, and then moving into quadrant four, where you have the awareness and you have the ability to pick from among several options instead of just automatically going from A to B. Quadrant three is a different animal entirely. So this is a situation where you have little awareness and a lot of control. And so getting back to your point of where being right can get you stuck, um, if you feel that there's one way to do things and you're sticking to that rigidly, and that's the only option for you, and there's no feedback loop to say, is this really what needs to happen? Is this the best way to go forward? You're going to stay stuck, because in your head, you know it. You know exactly what the plan forward is, and you keep charging forward, and then you're not getting the results that you want, and then
Mm.
missing that feedback loop. You don't have a chance to reflect on what you're doing and whether it's working for you, or what you even need to do to make some changes going forward.
Can I
So
ask you a
the
question? I mean, you practiced in the clinical setting for 25 plus years.
Yep.
Surely you have an example of this. Is there something that comes to mind, somebody you worked with along the way, where you can kind of give us a storied example of quad three?
hmm. Um, there's there's a lot of elements to that, but thinking of a specific example,
Or a general example,
yeah,
just something that might help people like me who learn better through storytelling.
yeah. Well, maybe it might be better if I kind of back it up and kind of walk through some of the steps, and then I think it'll
Okay.
become a little bit clearer. Because being right is just one facet of quadrant three. Sometimes people stick very strictly to rules, so it's not so much about being right, but it's about needing to do things in a particular way every time,
Mm,
and
okay.
and that can grate on other people when they're stuck in that. Um, there's there's some things that are behind this that I think are helpful for people to understand, and then the examples might make more sense later on. So with quadrant three, like I said, there's low awareness, but there's high degrees of control. So where does that control come from? If it's not coming from awareness, what's driving the control? So sometimes it's avoiding uncomfortable emotions. Sometimes it's sticking rigidly to internal rules that you have. Sometimes it's a matter of protecting your identity, who you believe yourself to be. And sometimes it's just biases that we have, that we grew up with. We learned from our parents to believe a certain thing about people, and to assume certain things about the world. And we kind of mark that in our mind as just being principled, but really it's just unchecked bias. And sometimes anxiety can mask itself as having high standards, right? So you're avoiding things because it makes you nervous, but you say, well, I don't do that because I'm better than that. So
Mm.
there are there are these unconscious drivers that kind of push people in a direction. And again, without that feedback loop, you don't get a sense to check it. It feels very deliberate to the person. It feels like that they're in control, but they're not aware of what's actually driving it.
I wonder, one of the things that I'm thinking about is this feels like, I always remember this quote that Dr. Robert Todd Hurst says all the time in his podcast, where he says, people don't resist change, they resist being changed.
Mhm.
And it feels like this is one of those things where like people have to come to this level of awareness
Yep.
on their own, because if somebody just keeps pointing out all your blind spots, you get annoyed by that. So is it worthwhile to talk about ways that folks can become a little bit more aware?
Yeah, you're not going to be able to change this with somebody. So let's say this is a loved one that you have, and you see that they're miserable, and to you looking at it from outside, they just seem so stuck, so rigid, like that you can see other ways that they could go about it that would get a better outcome, but they just keep hitting their head against the wall. And you care about them, you want to see them do different, but they don't see it, and they may have arguments, like some of the things that we had just talked about. You're not going to be able to attack it with logic, because they can give you a logical reason why they're doing what they're doing. But what they're not aware of is the emotional underpinnings of what's driving it, whether it's anxiety or shame or something else that's kind of keeping them stuck in that pattern. So you're not going to be able to reason with somebody like this and convince them through logic, because they can out logic you.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going then. I know you got a lot that you want to get, you want to pump us full of some good information today. So I'll let you I'm going to turn you loose. Where do you want to go?
So getting unstuck in quadrant 3 probably is going to require a therapist, for the reasons that that I explained about, resisting change and being able to argue it back. Um, if you're working with a therapist, you want to, or putting my therapist hat on, or how I would approach this with somebody, helping somebody to develop a level of emotional literacy, instead of asking them, well, what do you think about the situation, or what do you think about how you handled it? You might want to step back and say, how do you feel, or what happens to you when things seem uncertain? What's that internal process like for you when things seem uncertain? And just get them to describe. Well, they have to look at themselves to be able to describe what happens, right? And you might get answers like, well, I feel tense, or you might at first get an I don't know, because if they're not used to developing that feedback. But the goal is to try to introduce the idea of developing that metacognition, developing that sense of reflection of what it is that they're experiencing. So in other words, another way to describe it is, people that are stuck in quadrant 3 look at everything within the frame, but they don't ever question the frame itself. So
What do you mean by that?
yeah, so if um, let's say you there are certain things that you just never do, and anxiety is a good example of this. So maybe something happened early on in childhood, um, that that you developed anxiety toward it and avoidance toward it, and now as an adult you just don't do certain things. I don't like being in crowds. I don't like, whatever.
I don't go on scary rides. I don't go into loud rooms. I don't go yeah. Okay. Got it.
Well, you can talk about the behavior itself, but what's driving that? What's creating this anxiety that's causing the behavior in the first place? And where did that come from? The the more you get farther away from the initial event, be it a minor trauma or something like that, the brain, um, the brain becomes so used to reacting a certain way through repetitive patterns that you lose the connection to the original thing that caused it in the first place.
Mm.
So following through some of these rigid patterns, I do it because that's what I've always done, and there is no question about why. Challenging the frame is helping people to take a look at the why.
When you and I were getting started on this podcast today, before we jumped on live, you mentioned something that I think is worth talking to. It's this idea of having to defend an identity.
Mhm.
Do you mind marching that out a little bit? Does that seem like it would fit into what you're talking about?
Well, defending an identity is one thing that people get stuck and defend. You have an idea of who you are that was shaped, in your childhood, and so maybe in a certain relationship, you're the person who is competent. You're the one who's always expected to step up and take care of things. And when something happens that challenges that, it can create a conflict. So here's an example. You're the person who's always needing to do everything, and you break your leg, right? So now you're in the position where you can't do all the things, and you need to rely on family or somebody to do things for you, and it creates all this tension and anxiety, maybe to the point where the doctor says stay off your feet, and your family keeps finding you, getting up to find the remote to change the channel on the TV, or catches you like walking into the other room and doing things when you were told not to. So that's kind of that conflict of it's going against your identity, where maybe other people would be able to accept help from somebody else, and be able to comply with what needs to happen to heal. But that tension that's built up over not being able to care for yourself, and it's unconscious. It's not something that people are thinking through. They're just not being a good patient.
Okay. Well, let me get us back on track. And I apologize. I feel like I ping ponged you a little bit there in that. But okay, so if quadrant 3 is little awareness but lots of control,
Mhm.
help all of us understand that a little bit more. What do you mean by like I have a lot of control but a little bit of awareness?
The the control the control is it's kind of artificial. So it's the
Ah,
well, it it's the type of control where you're following rules, you're doing things in a particular way. So the problem is not having rules, but the problem is not ever reflecting on whether that's the right solution for this particular situation. So without the awareness, you're going to do what you always do, and it may come across as heavy-handed or inappropriate for the situation. And without that feedback, you you don't have the nuance, and you don't have the ability to choose other options from an array of options that could be available to you.
doing what we've always done because that's how we've always done it.
Mm.
This is what comes to mind when you talk
Right.
like that.
Well, and it gets people in trouble. So if you if you get very defensive when somebody challenges you,
Hmm.
and you're in a meeting, you're at work, you're in a meeting, and you propose an idea at a meeting, and somebody has a question about it, right? They're not being overly critical. They're not necessarily shooting it down. They have a question about it. But then that question triggers in you this idea that, oh, they're attacking me, right? So what's your response? So instead of listening to what the other person is saying about it, and taking into account, their perspective on it, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, you immediately become defensive and argumentative, and now it turns into a big scene in the meeting, right? That's probably not the outcome that you wanted. It's probably not good that you did that in front of your boss and you come across as defensive and inflexible and not a team player, right? So you end up sabotaging yourself because maybe what was driven that caused you to be defensive is that it felt like an attack. It felt like somebody was attacking your personality. And that's probably something that goes all the way back to childhood where, when you did something, your parents were overly critical and your childhood solution to that was to become very defensive and stick up for yourself, or maybe, in your family dynamic, you had older siblings or whatever, and you were always the underdog having to prove yourself. That script doesn't fit now as an adult. And if that automatic response, if you have no ability to pause in the moment, so you feel the tension, right? You present your situation in the meeting and somebody has a question about it and you feel the tension, right? You kind of feel attacked, but you just start blurting out and attacking back, right? That's where the lack of awareness becomes a problem, because you now have no ability to stop in that situation and reflect on a different outcome. You're gonna power through it without that awareness.
That's so fascinating because I always talk in, one of the keynotes that I deliver is how to talk to people you don't like talking to. And there is a section of it where I talk about how this is a really common kind of hard conversation style is people just come in with their ammunition. Here's
Mhm.
all the things I need to say. Here's all the things I need to say. You shoot, he shoots. You shoot, he shoots. You shoot, he shoots. And nobody really pays attention to what's going on. And this is the first time that I'm really thinking about how this is metacognition. This is both of those people have very little awareness of their styles.
Mhm. Yep.
And this is what's getting people into so much trouble. And so this is such a powerful podcast today for people who I love the example that you just mentioned. You get into a meeting, somebody offers up a rebuttal to your idea or a tweak to your idea, and you can't even become open to it. And if we were to like go back and look at snapshots of your career, we might see that this is a pattern for you. But
Right.
because you have such little awareness, you're probably not likely to change the behavior, right?
Right. And this is the trap that people get stuck in, is if you don't have the awareness, right? Even just hearing this podcast, if you're a quadrant 3 person and you don't realize it, um, you may not recognize yourself in this, right?
Hmm.
Because your identity is so tied up in your responses. And this is who I am. This is, these are my principles, and this is how I do things, and this is the right way to do things. And there is only one right way to do things, right? So that rigidity keeps you stuck to the point where even just a conversation around it, you might be able to say, oh, I know somebody that's like that, but you may not recognize yourself in it.
That seems problematic, Dave. Not gonna
Yeah.
lie, seems problematic. And
But
look, I think as you say that, all of us just reflected on somebody we know
yeah.
who's that way, and it gets back to something that the title of it, right? When being right is literally the thing that keeps you stuck, because this is the way we have to do it, because these are the rules.
Mm.
And look, wouldn't you agree? There's probably a time and a place for rules and rigidity. There's probably a
Oh,
time and a
absolutely.
place, yeah, for
Mhm.
that to be the case. But like in most cases, in meetings where we're cultivating ideas or coming up with new processes or talking about sales or whatever that discussion is going to be, there probably is some room for this thing to be a little bit more
Right.
malleable and spongy, so to speak.
Right. And we're not talking about the law and criminality, right? This is just everyday human interactions where you're you have one approach to the situation and that's the only way to do it. So if there's any hope of loosening anybody up, take a look at the outcomes that you're getting. Are you getting the outcomes that you want? Are you accomplishing the things that you're setting out to do? Are you having successful interactions with people at work? Are you are you getting along well with your friends, or are there conflicts where things blow up and then people ghost you and don't want to deal with you anymore, right? If that's the case, then step back and take a look. Are there things are there things the way I'm handling situations where my approach is one way and I'm not considering other possibilities? So this is where questioning the frame comes into place. Why is it necessary for you to be right all the time? What does it mean if you're not right? Right? Is that an attack against who you are as a person? Does it mean you're less than? So some of these questions can be kind of threatening, and a lot of times people that are stuck in quadrant 3, as soon as that discomfort kicks in, they immediately, their brain changes the subject and moves on to something else. So that's also where people get stuck, and where it's helpful to have a therapist. If you're seeing somebody on a regular basis, they kind of keep in their mind the continuous thread of the conversation that you've had with them, and they have examples in their mind of things that they've seen that maybe you weren't aware of, and trust them to reflect back to you some of this instead of sparring with them.
Okay, so we got to wrap up here in a sec. Give me some marching orders, Dr. Dave. And by the way, I just want to say, well, before you do that, so I'll let you think about what that is. If you all scan that QR code in the top right, you will be taken to Dr. Dave's Substack article where you can do a little bit more reading regarding metacognition. This is the article that he's just posted. And so you can go in and do a little bit of reading on this, and then you can also support Dr. Dave in his efforts. But I just wanted to mention that. And so, okay, man, close this up. 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Yeah. What's our marching orders today?
So when you're developing metacognition, you want to ask, not was the choice correct, but what was it that shaped how I chose? So that's the key insight for developing metacognition and moving from quadrant 3 to quadrant 4, right? So it's not was this the right thing to do, but how did I come to that choice? What was it that influenced me? And try to kick the door open a little bit to see where some of those less conscious or unconscious drivers are.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for being a part of it. As we always mention, and I'll put this QR code up in the top right, Dr. Dave and I together have authored an incredible 6-week wellness series. It is on the screen right now. It is called Revive and Thrive, the 6-week wellness challenge workbook. It is video led. Every single page or chapter has a QR code that you scan, and it's accompanied by a video that you watch on YouTube that leads you through this book. And we say it time and time again, but Dave, you put it best, right? Like, people always go to the gym. This is like fitness for your brain. This is like fitness for your mental health. And it's funny. I had a conversation yesterday with a cousin of mine, and we were talking about forgiveness. And he asked me at one point, he's like, do you really think forgiveness is that big of a deal? And I said, buddy, for a lot of people, it might be the whole game. It might be the whole game. And that's one of the chapters that we walk people through is forgiveness. And I encouraged him to read it because I said, look, what you need to understand that most people don't, and I didn't until I met Dr. Dave, was that forgiveness is a process, not a one-time event. So I know in my heart that this Revive and Thrive will be so helpful for so many people. And we encourage you to check it out. It is priced so cheaply at just $10 a week. So jump on Amazon, grab a copy, get to work on it. And, I think you're going to find that your life starts to become a little easier for you and the people around you.
Do it with a partner.
You work through this. Yeah. We always say that, like, grab an accountability buddy and do it with somebody, a spouse, a friend, somebody that you can meet up with and somebody do it.
To spot you and check your answers.
There it is, man. All right. So we will jump into quad 4 next week. Then we're going to get into quadrant 4. If we make it there.
Do a sum up. Yeah. We could do a sum up on quadrant 4 next week.
Okay. And high awareness, high control.
and what things look like when it's all firing on all 8 cylinders.
Love that, man. All right. Well, Dave, have a great day. I'll encourage everybody else to check out his Substack article, and we will see you guys tomorrow on our podcast. Have a great day. Thanks again, Dave.
All right, take care.